Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
I'm Amanda Gerkins from Legacy Leaders, and I'm here today with Mary Browning with the law firm of Cole Schatz. So good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good. How are you?
Good, good. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you.
So tell me, what made you decide on estate planning?
Really, I didn't know when I went into law school what type of law I was interested in. And the curriculum kind of gears you a little bit towards litigation at the beginning. But second year of law school, I took income tax, federal income tax, which I really, really enjoyed. Then I started taking some trust and estates classes, and it just really clicked for me. I thought that it was interesting, and I also kind of had a self-realization that being an attorney that was more of a, counselor or advisor to a client, as opposed to, arguing in court or being more litigious, was just something that was more suited for my personality. So, I always tell people I'm 80% therapist, 20% lawyer. And, that's really what I enjoy about the job.
Well, good. So you really enjoyed that portion of it. So that's good. So how did you get to Cole Schatz?
Before I knew I wanted to do trust and estates, I had interviewed with Cole Schatz for a summer associate position. I ended up going with a different firm. But when I realized that trust and estates was where I wanted to land, Cole Schatz was at the top of my list. We have, really the biggest practice in New Jersey, and well known in the state. And so I interviewed here and was fortunate to get the job, and that was, almost 20 years ago now.
Wow. Okay. Very good. So who is your ideal client?
We're able to really take on clients from young up-and-comers, just had a baby, need basic documents in place, to, multi hundreds of millions of dollars who need very sophisticated planning, and everywhere in between. So I don't have one ideal client. Okay. I love working with all of, that entire range, because there's just different challenges and different situations and life phases for every one of those. So I'm lucky enough to be able to take on a wide variety of clients. I do love growing with the younger clients. It's remarkable how much things change in their family life, in their professional life, in their assets, even just, checking in with them every 2-3 years. And as their needs grow, we're there to help them navigate that next phase, whatever it may be.
Okay. So what do you find that are the misconceptions that people have about estate planning?
I think one misconception is that if you don't have, millions of dollars, then it's not something you need to do. And I will tell you that it almost doesn't matter what you have. If the cost and aggravation of what your family will go through if you don't have appropriate documents in place is multiples of what it would cost you to have to pay for, an attorney to put together a plan. So I think one misconception is, I don't need that, or why do I need to think about that? I don't have, that much, whatever that much means to you, which, can be different things for different people. And also, I think there is a lot of hesitation for people because they don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about death. They don't want to think about it, that somehow if they talk about it, it means it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And although I understand the, desire to avoid it, I think that it leads to more anxiety. And certainly if something happens to you before you do it, it really can create such a horrible situation for your spouse or your kids when they're already having to deal with the loss of you. And on top of that, there is a lot of, complication and headache and delay that could have been avoided had you, just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off, did the work. And I will say that a lot of clients, once they're done, they feel such a sense of relief. And they can move on with their lives. They don't have to think about it anymore. So it's not as hard as I think sometimes people anticipate.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us a story about something that drastically went wrong.
So, a very extreme example, I'll give you two examples. So, and they're both on the extreme side, but they both happened, and they both happened, in the last 5 years or so. One was a client who was not a client prior to his death, and then the family came to us to help with the administration of the estate. And this was a person who owned a tremendous amount of real estate in multiple states. I think almost 40 different states. No will, no estate planning at all. And so on top of having to figure out what it was that he owned and how it was owned, there were all different entities. We had to probate not only in the state where he resided at his death, but in every state where there was property owned in his name. So we had to hire attorneys in every state. Every state has different rules about where the assets go if there's no will. So we ended up with some properties owned by the spouse, some properties owned partially by the spouse and the kids. It was a really, I think, the most extreme example I've seen of somebody when they don't have planning in place. Of course, most people don't have that those amount of assets nor the complexity of assets, but it's still, even if you have, less than that, and you're not dealing with 40 different states, it can still be really complicated, expensive, and difficult if you don't have the right documents in place. And then the other example I have is certain places, New York City being one of them, we strongly recommend revocable trusts instead of just having wills to avoid probate. Some states probate is fairly straightforward. Some places, Florida, New York, it's much more complicated and expensive. And unfortunately, I have a client whose husband died unexpectedly, very young. He had a will, but not a trust. We probated his will, COVID hit, basically shut down the court. Long story short, they also had some kind of scandal in the court. Long story short, he died in 2019, and we just found out in the last 2 weeks that they're finally going to be issuing letters testamentary. So for almost 4 years, really 3.5 years, the wife has been getting checks. So there are assets in his name. There are checks written out to him that she has absolutely no access or control over. And again, it's just, he thought having a will and, that he had things in place, but just the nature of the way that the New York Surrogates Court operates now, more needs to be done in terms of the planning. Those are a couple of my horror stories.
Your horror stories. Okay,
yeah.
so now let's hear a happy story. So tell us.
Yeah, I mean, as happy as it can be, right? I mean,
Right.
considering that, we're dealing with what happens when people pass, but in addition to just having clients that do the planning and feel, really good about getting it done, I mean, that's always wonderful. But if you do it right when somebody does pass, knowing how difficult it could be, and then seeing how relatively smooth and easy it is if you do it the right way while you're alive, and just the stress that it takes off of, the spouse or the kids. They may not realize it, right? Because it's the only experience they have, but I know, because I have, I'm dealing with many estates at a time. I know how difficult it can be. So when it goes smoothly, it's a relief to me, and whether they know it or not, it's a relief to the surviving family as well.
Right. So in your day-to-day practice, what do you find is your biggest challenge?
I think it's getting, I think sometimes it's getting things over the finish line. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that just aren't doing their planning. But when they get, either they know they need to do it, or one of their advisors kind of finally lights the fire and says, you really need to get this done. I'll meet with them. They'll retain us. We'll draft documents, and then sometimes it's radio silence, right? And it's important to understand that until you sign the documents, they are not effective. It doesn't matter that you told me what you wanted, or there's draft documents that spell out what you wanted. If they're not properly executed, then you might as well have done nothing, because that's the same result. So, sometimes with certain clients, I have to spend a lot of time kind of following up and saying, we really need to get this done. But it's important. And, I never like to see these plans linger. If people are having trouble moving forward because they can't agree, or they can't decide certain roles, for example, guardians, they have little kids and they just can't decide who would be the guardian. I always tell them, first of all, you can change it. Let's get something in place. Something's better than nothing. And I try to encourage them to at least get, the drafts in place, and we can always fine tune it later if they need. So that's certainly a challenge, I think, is just trying to push people without being too pushy. But, just making sure that they start the process. Let's make sure we finish it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. Everybody procrastinates, correct? So, I mean,
for sure.
And as you say, they're not really wanting to talk about it. So that kind of, puts them off for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you like best about the job?
Really two things. There is as I said before, the people component. I really enjoy, meeting new people, talking to them about their lives, their personal family lives, their financial lives, and coming up with the plan. So that part I really enjoy. The other part that I love as well is for the more complicated asset class, for the clients that have, more assets that require tax planning. That's more of an intellectual exercise that I enjoy. Trying to come up with strategies that can minimize the taxes for kids, and kind of coming up with that overall plan is enjoyable for me on that kind of intellectual side. So a combination of both.
Good. Okay, so tell us how people can reach you.
Sure, you can reach me. I'm at Cole Schatz, so my phone number is 201-525-6247. That's a New Jersey number, but I'm also licensed and have an office in New York as well. And our firm also handles estate planning in Florida. My email address is mbrowning, BROWNING at Coleschotz, COLESCHOTZ.com. So either one of those places, you can reach me.
Terrific. Okay. So you're licensed, as you said, in New York, New Jersey, and Florida.
Correct.
Good. Okay. Well, it was great having you.
Yes, thank you,
appreciate
Amanda.
the time, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Great. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.